Waiting on God can be one of the most challenging aspects of faith. It can feel frustrating, confusing, and even discouraging when you've been praying, believing, and standing in faith, yet nothing seems to be happening. You might start wondering if God even hears you or if he has forgotten about you. But what if I told you that the delay is not a denial? What if the waiting season is not a punishment, but a preparation? See, God operates outside of time. He is not limited by deadlines, clocks, or human expectations. When he gives a promise, he already sees the fulfillment of it. But the process between the promise and the fulfillment is where many people lose faith because they don't recognize what God is doing behind the scenes. Think about Joseph. God gave him dreams of greatness, showing him visions of ruling and leading. But before Joseph ever saw the throne, he had to endure betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment. If you look at that journey with human eyes, it seems unfair. It looks like God took Joseph through unnecessary suffering. But every moment of delay was actually preparation. God was shaping Joseph's character, building his resilience, and teaching him how to lead with wisdom. Had Joseph gone straight from the dream to the throne, he would not have been ready for the weight of responsibility that came with his calling. The delay was never a denial, it was development. The same principle applies to your life. You may be asking God for something and it feels like he's ignoring you. Maybe you've been praying for a financial breakthrough, but instead of instant provision, you find yourself in a season where God is teaching you how to steward the little you have. Maybe you've been asking for a relationship, but instead of sending the right person immediately, God is working on healing the broken places in your heart so that you can love from a place of wholeness. Maybe you've been asking for a new job, but instead of a door swinging wide open, God is developing your skills, stretching your patience, and increasing your capacity so that when the opportunity does come, you are fully prepared to walk in it. God is not in the business of giving premature blessings. A blessing given too soon can become a burden. Imagine a child asking for a car before they've learned to drive. The parent, in their wisdom, knows that giving them the car too early could be dangerous. It's not that they don't want to bless the child. It's that they love them too much to give them something they're not ready to handle. God works the same way. He knows when you're ready. He knows when the circumstances are aligned. He knows when giving you the answer to your prayer will bless you rather than break you. That's why sometimes he says, wait. But waiting is not wasted time. In fact, the waiting season is often the most important part of the journey. It is in the waiting that your faith is tested. It is in the waiting that you learn to trust God, even when you can't trace him. It is in the waiting that your character is refined, your heart is purified, and your dependency on God deepens. If you get discouraged in the waiting, you might forfeit what God is trying to develop in you. Instead of seeing the delay as rejection, start seeing it as preparation. Start asking God, what are you trying to teach me in this season? What are you developing in me? What do I need to learn before I step into the promise? Sometimes God withholds an answer because he wants to reveal himself in a new way. The Israelites cried out to God for deliverance from Egypt, and he sent Moses. But instead of an immediate escape, things got harder before they got better. Pharaoh increased their labor, and it seemed like God had made their situation worse. But in reality, God was setting the stage for one of the greatest demonstrations of his power if he had removed them instantly. They wouldn't have witnessed the Red Sea parting, the pillar of fire leading them, or the daily provision of manna. Sometimes the delay is so that God can show you his power in a way you've never seen before. You might be praying for something, and instead of seeing progress, it feels like things are getting worse. Don't be discouraged. This could be a sign that God is about to move in a way that will leave no doubt that it was him. The moments right before breakthrough often feel the hardest because they stretch your faith to its limits. But God is not just answering your prayer, he's building you in the process. If you rush the process, you might miss the lesson. If you quit in frustration, you might walk away from the very thing God was preparing you for. Faith is not just believing when things happen quickly, it's trusting even when things are slow. Abraham was given a promise that he'd be the father of many nations, but he had to wait decades before Isaac was born. David was anointed as king as a teenager, but he didn't sit on the throne until years later. Jesus waited 30 years before stepping into his ministry. If God made them wait, why do we think we'll be any different? Waiting is a sign that God is working. If he has you in a season of delay, it means he is setting things up perfectly for you. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to force a door open before God's timing. When we try to take matters into our own hands, we end up birthing something that isn't God's best. Look at Abraham and Sarah. Instead of waiting on God's promise, they took things into their own hands and Ishmael was born. But Ishmael wasn't the promise, Isaac was. When you rush the process, you may end up settling for something less than what God intended. The enemy loves to offer counterfeits in the waiting season, hoping you'll take a shortcut instead of trusting God's plan. That's why patience is so important. God sees the whole picture. He knows what's best for you. He knows what you need to develop before stepping into your promise. If the answer isn't here yet, it's not because God is ignoring you. It's because he is preparing something better than you imagine. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating things in ways you can't see. Every delay has a purpose. Every waiting season has a lesson. And every moment of silence is filled with divine strategy. Trust him. Opportunities often come in ways we least expect. When you've been praying for God to answer, one of the clearest signs that he is moving is when doors start opening in unexpected ways. These opportunities may not always look like what you imagine, but they are divinely orchestrated to position you for the very thing you've been asking for. Sometimes God answers prayers not by handing us what we want directly, but by giving us a path to walk into it. The challenge is that many people miss their blessing because they are looking for something familiar, something comfortable, something that fits their own expectations. But God is not limited to human logic. He moves in supernatural ways. And his opportunities often come disguised as challenges, assignments, or divine connections. When God is setting you up for your breakthrough, he will begin to shift things around you. People you were once close to may start to drift away. You may feel a sudden discomfort in places where you were once at ease. A job you relied on may no longer feel stable. These shifts are not random. They are indicators that God is making room for something new. The problem is too many people cling to the familiar, refusing to step into the new thing that God is doing. But when God is answering your prayers, he will always create a way for you to step into your next season. The question is, will you recognize it when it comes? In the Bible, when God called David to be king, he didn't place him on the throne immediately. Instead, he created an opportunity. Goliath, on the surface, Goliath was a problem, a threat, a giant that no one wanted to face. But in reality, Goliath was David's open door. Had David ignored the opportunity to step up and face the giant, he would have never been recognized as Israel's future leader. Many people pray for elevation, but reject the very challenges that are designed to take them there. Sometimes the answer to your prayer comes wrapped in opposition, in an assignment that stretches you, in an opportunity that requires faith. The key is to see beyond the surface and recognize that God is orchestrating your steps. Another way God opens doors is through divine connections. When you're in a season where God is answering, he will send people into your life who have the wisdom, resources, or influence to help you step into your next level. These connections may come through a random conversation, an unexpected introduction, or even someone who challenges you to see things differently. God often uses people as catalysts to push you into purpose. Ruth had Naomi, Esther had Mordecai, Paul had Barnabas. Divine partnerships are one of the ways God moves, but you have to be sensitive enough to recognize them. Sometimes the people God sends don't look like what you expected. They may not have the title or status you imagine, but they carry the wisdom or favor that you need. At times, the opportunities God presents require movement. When God called Abraham, he told him to leave his country, his people, and everything familiar to go to a land that he would show him. Notice that God didn't give Abraham all the details up front. He didn't give him a map or a full itinerary. He simply gave him an instruction: move. Many times when God is answering, he requires a step of faith. He won't always show you the whole picture. He'll give you a direction and expect you to trust him. Some people miss their breakthrough because they refuse to move until they have all the details. But faith doesn't work like that. Faith moves even when the details aren't clear. Faith steps forward even when the destination is unknown. When Jesus told Peter to step out of the boat and walk on water, Peter had a choice. He could have stayed in the boat where it was safe, where it was predictable, where it was comfortable. But the miracle was in the water, not in the boat. The opportunity to do something supernatural was right in front of him, but he had to take the first step. When God is answering your prayers, he will often ask you to step out of the boat. It may look risky. It may not make sense, but if you stay stuck in what's comfortable, you may never walk into what God has for you. Opportunities from God also come with peace. Even if they challenge you, even if they stretch you, there will be an inner knowing, a divine confirmation that this is the right move. That's why discernment is so critical. Not every open door is from God. Some doors are distractions, some are detours, and some are traps. The enemy knows how to present counterfeit opportunities that look good but lead to destruction. This is why it's important to pray for wisdom and seek God's guidance in every opportunity. A God-given opportunity will always align with his purpose, will not compromise your integrity, and will ultimately bring him glory. When God opens a door, he also gives the grace to walk through it. This doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but it does mean that you won't have to force it. Some people waste years trying to push open doors that God never ordained for them. But when it's God's timing, the right opportunities will align in ways that only he could orchestrate. You won't have to manipulate or beg people to notice you. You won't have to force something that isn't flowing naturally. When God is in it, there will be provision, there will be clarity, and there will be favor. God's opportunities often come in seasons of transition. He may be closing one chapter in order to open another. The key is to not hold on so tightly to the past that you miss what he is doing in the present. The Israelites cried out for deliverance, and God answered them by leading them out of Egypt. But many of them struggled to embrace the new season because they were still mentally attached to their old one. When God is moving, you have to be willing to let go of what was in order to receive what is coming. One of the biggest indicators that God is opening doors is acceleration. When the right opportunity comes, things will start to move quickly. What seemed stagnant for years will suddenly gain momentum. This is not a coincidence. It is divine timing at work. There will be moments when things that seemed impossible begin to align effortlessly. When that happens, don't hesitate. Don't allow fear or doubt to talk you out of what God is doing. Sometimes we pray for something and then second guess ourselves when it finally arrives. But when God opens a door, it is not for you to stand in the hallway wondering if you should enter. It is for you to walk through boldly, knowing that he has prepared the way. When God is about to answer your prayers, one of the clearest signs is increased opposition in spiritual warfare. Many people assume that when they are in alignment with God's will, everything should fall into place smoothly. But the reality is, the closer you get to your breakthrough, the more resistance you will face. The enemy does not fight what isn't a threat. The moment you step into God's purpose for your life, the attacks intensify because the enemy knows that if you walk fully in what God has for you, you will cause damage to his kingdom. The increase in struggles, delays, distractions, and even unexpected hardships is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is proof that you are getting closer to what he has promised. Spiritual warfare can show up in many ways. Sometimes it manifests as external opposition, people suddenly turning against you, opportunities that were once certain suddenly being blocked, unexpected setbacks in areas where you were making progress. Other times the battle is internal. Doubt creeping in, fear rising up, anxiety increasing, or a sudden struggle with temptations that you thought you had already overcome. The enemy will try to wear you down so that you give up right before the blessing arrives. He knows he cannot stop God's plan, but he will do everything he can to make you stop believing in it. The enemy thrives on discouragement because if he can convince you that things will never change, you will forfeit the blessing that was already on its way. The Bible is filled with examples of people who experienced their greatest opposition right before their breakthrough. Before the Israelites entered the promised land, they had to fight giants. Before David became king, he was hunted by Saul. Before Jesus stepped into his public ministry, he was tempted by Satan in the wilderness. The pattern is always the same. Right before elevation, there is intense resistance. This is because the enemy sees what is coming even before you do. He sees the doors that God is about to open, the influence you are about to step into, the impact you are about to make, and he does everything possible to stop it. But the enemy only has power if you agree with his lies. One of the enemy's favorite tactics is distraction. He will send situations, people, and thoughts designed to pull your focus away from what God is doing. Sometimes these distractions come in the form of unnecessary conflicts, drama, or people who suddenly reappear in your life just as you are moving forward. Other times, distractions come as opportunities that look good, but are actually designed to pull you off course. Not every opportunity is from God, and not every open door is meant to be walked through. Discernment is key because the enemy knows how to package distractions as blessings. The goal is to make you so caught up in something insignificant that you lose sight of the real promise that God is bringing to pass. Another sign of increased spiritual warfare is the sudden presence. You may have been confident in what God spoke to you, but now you find yourself questioning if you really heard him. Thoughts like, maybe I'm not ready, maybe this isn't for me, or what if I fail, begin to flood your mind. This is a classic tactic of the enemy because he knows that fear paralyzes. If he can make you doubt yourself, you will hesitate instead of moving forward. But fear is not from God. The Bible says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Fear is a tool the enemy uses to keep you stuck, to make you shrink back when you are called to step forward. There are also times when spiritual warfare shows up as exhaustion. You may feel drained, overwhelmed, or like you are constantly fighting battle after battle with no relief. This is because the enemy wants to wear you down. If he can't make you quit through fear or distraction, he will try to exhaust you to the point where you no longer have the strength to keep pressing forward. This is why spiritual endurance is so important. The breakthrough is often right on the other side of the moment when you feel like giving up the most. Prayer and fasting become essential in seasons of heavy warfare. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, he responded to every attack with the word of God. This is a model for how to fight spiritual battles. You cannot combat spiritual attacks with natural strategies. You have to be rooted in prayer, standing firm in God's promises, and refusing to give in to what the enemy is trying to do. There will be moments when you don't feel like praying, when you don't see any progress, when it feels like nothing is changing. But faith is not about what you feel, it's about what you know. And what you know is that God is faithful. He does not start something without finishing it. There is also a strategy the enemy uses where he makes things look worse right before they get better. The situation may suddenly seem impossible. Obstacles may start piling up, and circumstances may look completely contrary to what God promised. This is because the enemy is desperate. He sees that his time is running out, so he throws everything he can at you, hoping you will break under pressure. But the moment of greatest pressure is often the moment before the greatest breakthrough. This is why perseverance is crucial. If you give up now, you will never see the fulfillment of what you've been praying for. Sometimes opposition comes through people who were once close to you. You may notice unexpected betrayals, misunderstandings, or sudden tension in relationships that were once strong. This is because the enemy knows that division weakens you. He wants to isolate you, make you feel alone, and cause you to lose trust in those around you. But you have to recognize when something is a spiritual attack. Not every argument is about what it seems on the surface. Sometimes the enemy is using people as a distraction to pull you away from your focus. The enemy cannot stop what God is doing, but he can try to stop you from believing in it. He will whisper lies, send distractions, stir up fear, and increase resistance. But none of these things change the fact that when God speaks, his word will come to pass. What you are experiencing is not a sign that you are losing. It is a sign that you are on the verge of breakthrough. The pressure you feel, the battles you are fighting, the opposition that seems relentless, all of it is proof that something is shifting in the spirit. The key is to keep going, to stand firm, and to refuse to let anything pull you away from what God has already promised. When God is about to answer your prayers, one of the clearest signs is an unexplainable peace in the midst of uncertainty. It's the kind of peace that doesn't make sense, the kind that settles deep in your spirit even when circumstances around you seem chaotic. This peace is not based on what you see, but on what you know. Knowing that God is working behind the scenes, that his promises are true, and that his timing is perfect. It's the kind of peace that allows you to rest, not because everything is figured out, but because you trust the one who is in control. This peace is different from the temporary relief that comes from external reassurance. It is not dependent on the opinions of others, the security of finances, or the stability of circumstances. It is supernatural, coming directly from God, and it overrides logic, emotions, and fears. This is why the Bible calls it the peace that surpasses all understanding. It's the peace that allows you to walk into an unknown season with confidence, to face obstacles without fear, and to trust God even when things don't seem to be changing. Often before God answers a prayer, he prepares your heart to receive the answer. This preparation comes in the form of an internal shift, a deep, settled assurance that everything is already taken care of. The same situation that once caused anxiety no longer has power over you. The thing that used to keep you up at night now feels small compared to the greatness of God. This shift doesn't always come with immediate visible changes, but it is a sign that God is moving. Before you see it in the natural, you will feel it in your spirit. One of the ways this peace manifests is through a change in your response to difficulties. Things that used to frustrate you no longer have the same effect. Situations that once brought worry now bring an opportunity to trust God more deeply. This is not because the problems have disappeared, but because your perspective has shifted. God is strengthening your faith, teaching you to rely on him, and preparing you to handle what he is about to release into your life. If you are experiencing this type of inner peace, it is a sign that God is positioning you for what you have been praying for. Another way this peace shows up is through a quiet confidence. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't need constant reassurance. You no longer feel the need to manipulate situations, force outcomes, or stress about the details. You are simply at rest, knowing that God is working everything out for your good. This confidence allows you to move with wisdom rather than urgency. Instead of making impulsive decisions based on fear, you wait on God's timing. Instead of trying to control things, you surrender them. Instead of being consumed by worry, you are anchored in faith. This peace also brings clarity. When God is answering your prayers, distractions lose their power. Things that once seemed important no longer hold your attention. Relationships that were built on insecurity begin to fade. Opportunities that once looked appealing no longer seem as valuable. This is because God is aligning your heart with his will. He is making sure that when the blessing arrives, you are ready to receive it without hesitation or confusion. Peace allows you to focus, to hear God clearly, and to recognize his hand in your life. Sometimes this peace comes in moments of stillness. You may find yourself drawn to spend more time in prayer, worship, or reflection. There is a sense that something is shifting, even if you can't explain it. God is speaking, guiding, and revealing things to you in ways that you may not have noticed before. The key is to lean into it. The more you rest in his presence, the stronger the peace becomes. It becomes an anchor that keeps you steady even when things don't look the way you expected. One of the biggest confirmations of this peace is that external chaos does not shake you. Even when things seem to be falling apart around you, there is an inner knowing that everything is actually falling into place. The storm may still be raging, but it no longer has the power to steal your joy. The delay may still be there, but it no longer makes you doubt God's promise. The opposition may still be present, but it no longer intimidates you. This is because your faith is no longer rooted in what you see, but in what God has spoken. God's peace also protects you from making decisions out of desperation. When people are anxious, they often settle for less than what God intended. They take shortcuts, compromise their values, or rush into things because they fear missing out. But when you have God's peace, you can wait with confidence. You are no longer moved by pressure or deadlines. You are no longer swayed by what others think. You trust that what is meant for you will come at the right time, in the right way, with no need for manipulation or striving. This peace allows you to rejoice before the breakthrough comes. It shifts your prayers from desperation to gratitude. Instead of begging God to do something, you begin thanking him in advance, knowing that it is already done. Your posture changes, your mindset shifts, and your faith is strengthened. You stop questioning if God will answer and start praising him because you know he already has. Another indication of this peace is the absence of fear. Fear loses its grip when you truly believe that God is in control. Worry fades when you understand that he is working all things together for your good. Doubt disappears when you remind yourself of his faithfulness. The enemy cannot shake someone who is fully convinced that God's plan will prevail. This is why peace is one of the strongest weapons against the attacks of the enemy. It keeps you from reacting emotionally, from being easily discouraged, and from making choices based on fear rather than faith. Sometimes the greatest confirmation that your prayer is being answered is that you no longer feel the need to ask for it constantly. It's not that you don't still desire it, but there is a sense of completion, a deep assurance that it is already settled in the heavens. You no longer feel the urge to keep pleading because you know that God has already declared it done. That is what real peace looks like. It is unshaken, unwavering, and unstoppable. It is a sign that God is moving, even if you can't see it yet.